All right, let's do this. Well, welcome everyone to Everybody Has a Story to Tell, Developing Your First Presentation. I want to thank you all for kicking off your past summit with me. So, just going to go through the rudimentary slide. You're going to get sick of this probably by later this afternoon, if not later this week. Please silence your cell phones. That's pretty self-explanatory. Do take some time to explore everything that the Professional Association for SQL Server happens to offer. There's a whole bunch of information up here, but the one thing I just encourage everyone to do, network. Meet people at this conference. It's just something that, for me, has been a game changer, and hopefully for all of you will be a game changer for your long-term careers. But PASS has got all sorts of awesome stuff to offer. So, here's my bio slide, a little bit of information about me. I'm based out of the Chicago area, blah, 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 blah. Most of this is kind of fluff. There is one bit of information, though, that I want to draw your eye to up here. It's the fact that I've only been speaking since 2014. However, I've been working with SQL Server for a heck of a lot longer than that, since 2001. So this is a long time. So why am I pointing this out? Well, here's the thing. For all those years before I started speaking, I was just like all of you, attending conferences, going to user group sessions and SQL Saturdays, and sitting in the audience, just like you all, and learning from all of these awesome experts in the industry, people that I looked up to. And for all of those years, I always thought to myself, there is no way in hell that I would ever get up on stage. I'm not a walking encyclopedia. I don't know everything there is to know about SQL Server. But you know what? There is one thing that I could do, and that I kind of came to the realization of, and I started doing. I can not necessarily know everything, but I can become friends with these people. I can get involved. And I can start volunteering at events, because anyone can help work a registration table, collect lunch tickets, and things like that. So I became friends with a lot of these people that I looked up to, and that was really, really awesome. But I learned something very important by befriending all of these different speakers that I looked up to. They're not that different than me. They all use Google to look things up. They all have things that they don't know either. They talk to their friends. They run into crazy problems, and they beat their head against their desk just like I do. They just happen to be a little crazier and decided to get up on stage and talk about it and share a little bit about that. So, with some mentoring and some prodding, I came up with my own idea. In fact, I put a presentation together about why your data type choices matter, and that was kind of the first thing that got me started. And again, back in 2014, I gave my very first presentation at a SQL Saturday in Madison, Wisconsin. As they say, the rest is history. So that's just a little bit of history about me and my story about how I got started. But the rest of this presentation is going to be all about you and how I'm going to help you all get started getting into presenting. All right, so I'm very technical, so I like to lay out an agenda, and I also like to lay out a process. So that's kind of, this presentation is going to be very, very structured. So first of all, we're going to be talking about creating your idea. I'm going to be talking about some topics in relation to that. Second chapter will be developing your subject matter. I'll be talking about different aspects related to that. Third chapter will be called building your content. And then the final chapter is all about presenting your session and tips and tricks related to all of that. All right? So if this agenda meets your expectations, then let's buckle up and let's get going. There is a worksheet that if you want to go download this, you can use this a little later on. It's a longer URL. The only thing you really have to remember is SQLBeck and GitHub. SQLBeck is my Twitter handle. It's my primary alias online. But otherwise, you can go download this little worksheet later on and start filling out some of the things that we'll be talking about today. And again, it'll make sense. Hey, come on in. Welcome. So yes, fill out this worksheet. Again, just remember github.com, SQLBeck. This will also be up on the very last slide as well. So I will give everyone another moment or two to take a quick snapshot if you want. And let's move along. All right, chapter 1, creating your idea. So first of all of you who are sitting in this room hopefully may have an idea to start with already. And I was going to ask, is anyone in here willing to share their initial idea of what they might want to talk about as their first presentation? Any takers? Yes, sir. Okay, we have a gentleman back here who's thinking about doing something with time-based data in SQL Server. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Yes, in the back. How to stay home when there's a production outage. I love it. All of these are great, great topics. Now, on the other hand, for those of you who are still kind of not really sure where to get started, well, when was the last time you taught someone something? Even if we're relative beginners in the industry, we still find ourselves teaching people something. That could be the basis for your initial idea. Or when was the last time you learned a new technology? Well, obviously we're just kicking off past Summit, but hopefully over the next couple of days, you're going to learn about some really cool new technologies, right? So that's another idea. What's something that you just want to learn about and dive into? You can always give a presentation about, this is my learning journey, right? Or when was the last time you completed a major project? Maybe some kind of migration up to Azure or some kind of HADR type implementation or something really cool in T-SQL or something really cool in Power BI. That's something you can totally share about, lessons learned and things like that, right? In the end, what I want to encourage you to do is to pick a topic that you find interesting. This is most critical because this is your very first presentation. You need to pick a topic that you are engaged in and that you are passionate about, because oftentimes building that first presentation is a very daunting task. So if you choose a topic that you are not extremely passionate and interested about, you run the risk of basically becoming disengaged or losing interest in this endeavor. So pick something that you want to learn more about. Now, if none of those presentation ideas worked well for you, this is my favorite first presentation idea. When was the last time you had to yell at your coworkers or a colleague and say, stop, please, don't do this. This is, destroying production. This is, wrecking my SQL servers or whatever the case is, right? When was the last time you just had to say, please stop doing this, and here's why? In fact, with my data type session, that was something that I was doing on a frequent basis because in that particular job, I was a T-SQL developer working with a whole bunch of .NET developers who happened to write T-SQL. And to them, data types didn't really matter. But me with my knowledge of the storage engine, I started teaching them why they needed to care about these things. And that was the foundation for my very first presentation. All right, so when you're coming up with this idea, it's more than just an idea. Think about not only just the topic in of itself, but your experience around the topic. And this is where the whole idea of your story comes into play. The most boring presentations are the ones that just share a whole list of facts. I can go read books online if I just wanted to learn a whole bunch of facts. Instead, I want to hear your story. I want to hear about your experience with this technology, with this topic. So here's some examples of different things that you can talk about, whether it be mistakes that you've made, project challenges, or even why are you interested in this? Maybe it's a technology you haven't even worked with yet. But you know what? I'm really interested in this because I see the potential for these kind of use cases because of my experiences in the past, right? These are different ways that you can make these sorts of things relatable and personal. Okay? Now, here's the thing. When I say set expectations, you may come up with a phenomenal idea. But I've worked with first-time presenters who will come up with this idea. They will, give the presentation, but they'll be extremely disappointed when only a handful of people show up because the idea or topic they chose, while it may have been really awesome, was a niche topic. And that's perfectly okay, but the thing is they didn't necessarily set those expectations for themselves, so they wound up feeling disappointed that they weren't able to pack a room. I mean, to be perfectly honest, this particular presentation right now is not going to be something that it's going to fill, a 300, 500-person ballroom, right? I got a couple of dozen people in here, and that's perfectly okay. What I like to tell people is keep in mind that it's all about quality versus quantity when it comes to audience members and whatnot. So, don't worry about trying to pack a room full of 50, 100, 150 people. I'd rather have a quality conversation with just 20 people or 10 people, because these are all people who are here to learn about your particular topic. But just keep in mind that, again, if you do choose a niche topic, set your expectations as far as how popular it may or may not be. And that's perfectly okay. Now, here's the thing. A lot of folks will say, well, maybe I want to talk about indexing. I'm really big on indexing, or some other kind of common topic. But the thing is, you don't want to talk about it because there are experts out there who have done presentations about this stuff for years. Well, here's the thing. When was the last time you threw a question into your favorite search engine and you came up with a whole bunch of different results? So you started reading through the different results, and that first result that you pull up makes absolutely no sense to you. It's complete and utter gibberish. So you go to the second article. And you start reading that, I'm not getting it. Third one and fourth one, you keep going down the list until in this case you get to the fifth entry or the fifth result. And finally, that one makes sense to you. You could be that fifth article or fifth entry for someone else. Not everyone in this room will necessarily come away from this particular session, with the full appreciation of everything I've talked about. Because again, I have a particular way of presenting material and things like that. Some of it will resonate with, some people, hopefully with most of you. But again, sometimes, certain things just don't click until you hear it in a different way from a different person. You could be that different person for any number of people out there. And in the end, the other thing that is unique to you is not the subject matter or the facts you talk about, it's your story that you tell, because that is unique to your experience. Think about it this way. What if all of us attended a rock concert? Each one of us is going to have a different experience at that same exact rock concert. I got my friend Tyler up here. He could be sitting in the front row jamming out, seeing all sorts of different experiences, but he's going to miss out on some of the shenanigans that are happening in the back, or different things like that. Again, just because we're all in the same place, we're all having a different experience about it. And if I were to ask and interview each one of you about your story and your experience, you're going to share something completely different, even though we were all at the same event, right? So think of it in that context. So if you're worried about a topic or an idea that's been done before, put that aside. Now that we're kind of coming up with that initial idea, I want to help you focus that idea. And to do that, I'm going to use two different techniques. You can use one or the other, or both if you wish, but this is what I'm going to teach you now. The first technique is something called the focus statement. And the second technique is something I call rules of engagement. The focus statement. I'm going to ask each and every one of you to repeat this after me out loud, and we're not going to continue on until you participate. So this is forced participation. Every blank, should or must blank, because blank. Thank you. So this is something I learned from my good friend Buck Woody, who is currently at Ignite. He's a phenomenal presenter, and he gave a presentation about getting into this type of thing a number of years back, and this is where I learned this from him. But the idea is that you're really trying to focus your idea into this particular template. So how does this work? Well, every, say, production DBA should or must know how to restore their backup files. Because if you can't restore, from backup, then your backups are completely worthless, right? That was a very simplistic example, but the idea is to take your idea and put it into this template, because it'll help focus you. And this will actually become very, very worthwhile later on in this process. So it's worth taking the time to do this now. Now, if you don't care for this, you can always try the rules of engagement. The rules of engagement will force you to answer 3 different questions. What do you want to talk about? And when you answer this, write out maybe 1 to 3 sentences explicitly. What is it that you want to talk about? Okay? And then you're going to answer, why do you want to talk about it? But there's a second half to this why that I also want you to answer. So again, it's why do you want to talk about it? Like, why do you find this technology interesting? Or again, lessons learned or something like that. But the other half that I want you to also answer and write out is, why should an attendee come to your session? What will they get out of it? What is the draw for them? Right? So that is something else that I want you to consider when it comes to the why, and answer that. And finally, to whom do you want to talk about this? You need to identify your target audience. In this presentation, my target audience happens to be people who have never presented before. On the other hand, I've had friends who've come in here before who have either given a few presentations. I've even had seasoned speakers who've been doing this for years come and attend this presentation before. They're not my target audience, but they happen to oftentimes learn a tip or trick or something like that, but the vast majority of the content happens to be a review for them because they're seasoned speakers. But again, that's not who I'm after. I'm targeting people who are either first time or never spoken before. And hopefully they will get the most value out of it. If someone else happens to get value out of it that's not my target audience, that's an added bonus. But you can't satisfy everyone. So you must identify your initial target audience and focus in on them. So the answers to these questions, these focusing exercises, will guide you through the rest of the process. So I'm going to ingrain this back into your skull. So please repeat after me. Every blank should or must blank because blank. Or you can use the rules of engagement. What? Why? Or to whom? All right. This will come back to haunt you. All right. So now that you have that idea focused, you're going to have to come up with ways to market and sell this idea. And for that, you need to come up with a formal title and an abstract. Now, one thing I want to point out, some speakers like to come up with the title and abstract much later in the process, and that's perfectly okay. I had to stick it somewhere, so I stuck it at this point. Because sometimes I will come up with an idea for a session, I'll develop the title and abstract, and then I'll start submitting it to events, and it's only after it gets accepted then I start the entire process of putting it together. But everyone is different, and that's perfectly okay. But for the purposes of our conversation today, we're going to talk about it now, title and abstract. All right. So what to call a given presentation? When I first started speaking, I was a big fan of catchy and cute titles. I like to try and put a little bit of humor into things. You know, maybe a little play on words, something fun, right? Because, I mean, most of the stuff we talk about, frankly, is pretty dry technical stuff, right? So that being said, over the years, my mindset changed. I became more of a fan of titles that were direct, basically trying to state the facts of what this presentation is all about. And there's also this, two schools of thoughts as far as, do I want a title as short as possible or one that's extremely long and descriptive? So my personal bias is direct with facts only. And if you can inject a little bit of humor, that's fine, but really it's imperative to get the facts in there. Why? Well, when was the last time you had a printed schedule to an event like a SQL Saturday? And if you only happen to have a printout in front of you and you hadn't quite decided what you want to do, all you have are a bunch of titles to go off of. And frankly, unfortunately, they say don't judge a book by its cover. A lot of us wind up judging a session by its title. So if a title does not clearly convey what your presentation is about, a prospective attendee is going to look at it and say, I don't know if I want to go to this or not. I don't know if this fits me. I don't know if this is something that can help me out or interests me or not. But as opposed to a presentation, that's very, very clear. I mean, the second half of my title in this case was developing your first presentation. I think that's pretty clear, don't you? In either case, let's walk through a quick example. Your queries, your indexes, and you, that's kind of, it's a play on, a common catchphrase. On the other hand, it doesn't really quite convey what that session is about. This one's a little bit better, how indexes actually help your queries. It could probably be improved, but I'm attempting to make, to convey more clearly what that idea is or what that presentation is going to be all about. So, despite the fact that a lot of attendees will never bother reading abstracts, there's one key group of people that always will, the session committee, or the people who select speakers for a given event or user group. So, for a good abstract, I like to follow a specific format: hook questions, agenda statements, and takeaway promises. So your abstract will be comprised of these three different components. First of all, the hook. The idea of the hook is to identify your target audience. Remember that every blank, that's your target audience. Or again, the to whom, that's your target audience. So you're going to use some hook questions to try and figure out, does this apply to me? So that you're putting yourself in the mindset of a given attendee. Is this something that would interest me? Is this something that applies to me, right? So that's the idea of the hook. You want to get someone's someone's mind going as they're reading a abstract. And then the second half of second portion of the abstract should be the agenda. This is where you want to very clearly communicate exactly what it is that you're going to be talking about. I don't know about you, but I've attended presentations where I've taken the time to read the abstract, and the agenda wasn't quite clearly laid out, or the agenda was completely different than what the session wound up being about, and I wound up coming away disappointed. So it is imperative that you clearly communicate what you will be talking about. What are your main subtopics? Finally, the takeaway promise. After 60 or 70 minutes, hopefully your attendees will go home with something, whether it's a new set of knowledge or a new set of tools like T-SQL scripts or PowerShell scripts or Power BI templates or something like that. But again, what is it that you are giving to them? You want to clearly communicate that, the takeaway promise. If you give me 60 minutes of your time, I'm going to arm you with this set of knowledge. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to teach you how to get past this challenge or obstacle, right? So you need to clearly communicate that. What are you giving your attendees when they give you a bit of their time? Okay? So when it comes to developing a title or abstract, I find a lot of folks will go alone in that they don't bother asking people for help or feedback. And I think you should do the complete opposite. Even the most seasoned presenters will ask for feedback. I will send out titles and abstracts to friends and coworkers. I will also send it out to people who are non-technical as well. They may not understand half of the stuff I'm talking about in the agenda, but at least, hey, does this, is this clear to you? Does this make sense to you? Like, if you were technical or if you were in this particular field, does this sound like something that makes sense? Right? A lot of us are very, very active on Twitter. So, the SQL family hashtag is a really, really big thing. I'm really big on Twitter. So, that's something that, I would encourage you to do. There have been plenty of times where I'm working on a title and abstract. I'll throw out a tweet. Hey, is anyone around to just review a title and abstract with me? Want to DM me or something like that? And I'll get responses within minutes. So that's a very, very convenient way just to kind of, to reach out to the community to ask for help. Now, I know a lot of people actually don't care for Twitter, especially given some of the politics and shenanigans that go on there. But did you know that there is a SQL Server community on Slack? So if you go to that URL down there, you can avoid a lot of that noise, if you will, and have conversations with some of the top minds of the industry who now hang out on the Slack channel that was set up by the folks who do the DBA PowerShell tools. So check that out as an alternative as well. There's an entire sub-channel for speaking and presenting. So again, another place to go for feedback where people are more than happy to help. All right, so just to quickly recap, we talked a bit about the abstract. You want to think about your hook questions to identify your to whom, your agenda statements to talk about the what, and the takeaway promises. Again, what are people going to take away and take home once you are done? So let's just recap briefly the Create Your Idea chapter. I talked a little bit about picking an idea and focusing. What is the focus statement, by the way? Every blank should or must blank, because blank. Otherwise, the rules of engagement, what, why, and to whom, okay? And then title and abstract format, we talked a little bit about that as well. Any questions at this point? Yes?
How long should the abstract be?
The question is, how long should the abstract be? The answer, of course, is it depends. I've actually submitted to some events where there's actually a hard limit on the length of abstract, a certain number of characters or things like that. So. And I've seen some people write much, much longer abstracts, several paragraphs actually. I'm not personally a fan of that, but there are other people, other schools of thought that will do much longer abstracts. My personal bias is to try and keep it under 1,000 characters. And for each section, limit it to 2 to 3 sentences at most. But that's my personal bias. I like short and sweet. And again, because I've also run into the, I wrote a much longer abstract, and now I have to trim it down. The other thing is this. If you submit to some of the larger events like PASS, for example, you are forced to write your abstract 3 different ways, which is a huge pain, because the thing is you have to write your full abstract, and then you have to do a slightly shorter abstract for some of the schedules, and an even shorter abstract for print material. So keep that in mind as well, that you may have to wind up rewriting that abstract, again, if you're starting to submit to some of the larger events. But again, first-timers, user groups, SQL Saturdays, don't worry about it. Just write something. Great question. Anything else before we move on? All right. Chapter 2, developing your subject matter. So you got this great idea. You wrote the focus statement. You wrote the answers to the rules of engagement. All right, now what? Well, this is where we start our brainstorming phase of all of the other information that we want to present in the context of this presentation. So if nothing else, we need some major subtopics. And here's some examples of different subtopics that you could dive into. Whether it be an edge case scenario or some kind of specific project or some kind of aspect of the technology or whatever the case may be. But you're going to be breaking this presentation up into a couple of different chunks. So these are your subtopics. Now, you might come up with like 10 great ideas, and that could be really awesome. But I want to strongly encourage you to limit yourself to 3 to 5 major subtopics. And the reason for that is this. Typically speaking, you're only going to have a 60-minute time slot for that presentation. SQL Saturdays, user groups are typically 60 minutes or so. And that 60 minutes flies by insanely fast. So if you have 5 subtopics, you effectively have 10 minutes each for those, plus a few minutes for intro, a few minutes for closing and conclusion, and a few minutes for Q&A. That's not a lot of time. You might think 10 minutes is an eternity, but when you're up on stage and you're talking, 10 minutes is a blink of an eye. So do limit yourself. Again, later on, when you are a more seasoned presenter, all these rules go out the window. You do what you're comfortable with. But for that first presentation, don't bite off more than you can chew, okay? So in either case, we're still in that brainstorming phase. But while we're brainstorming, we might be coming up with all these subtopics, but we're also coming up with a whole bunch of other ideas, materials, supporting things. So I'm a big fan of building up as much as I possibly can. This is, again, the brainstorming phase where I'm just writing everything down. So what kind of material is really, really good? Think outside the box. Think about other practical use cases of the technology. I'm a huge fan of analogies to help break down ideas and help people understand things. One of my presentations, about a third of it, I actually talk about a pasta dinner recipe to help explain and break down the query optimizer. It's actually a fun little tidbit. And of course, stories resonate with everyone. Here's the things that I screwed up. So, and I'm sharing that so you won't screw it up, right? Everyone loves to hear about how people screwed something up, right? And hopefully about how they fixed it in the end. But share personal stories and think about those types of things. Now, as you're brainstorming, I can't encourage you enough to write it all down and anything that comes to mind. Because here's the thing. You might say to yourself, oh, don't worry, I'm not going to write that down. I'm going to remember that. You won't remember that. Unless you truly have a photographic memory, you're not going to remember it. I also like to point out, remember the one-liners. What do I mean by a one-liner? There will be times when I'm doing stuff completely unrelated to whatever it is, and I'm like, oh, I want to say this one statement. I want to make this one point. Something very simple. It's just that, again, that little one-liner. Write those little things down. I like to use OneNote, and whenever I'm creating a presentation, I will have a dedicated page called a snippets page. And that's all it is. It's just a collection of one-liners, right? Just little reminders. It doesn't have to be the full story or full talking point or whatever. It's like, ooh, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that. And I just fill that page up. So again, we're just brainstorming at this point. We're not collecting it all yet. But once we're done, or before that, okay, so now that we've kind of gone through all this brainstorming, we have a whole bunch of material built up. You might have heard the phrase that content is king. Well, I actually strongly disagree with that because now that I'm faced with having these pages and pages and pages of material, stuff needs to go onto the cutting floor, right? The editing floor. And you remember the focus statement and the rules of engagement? This is really the king. All content must serve the king. Meaning, if you have a piece of content or like a snippet or something like that that does not directly relate to the things that you filled out earlier in the focus statement or rules of engagement, it must go. It is a tangent. Because I don't know about you guys, but I've been in presentations where speakers go off on tangents, and it drives me nuts. I'm sitting in an Azure presentation, but they start talking about something completely unrelated to Azure. I'm like, okay, that's really cool, but you're supposed to be talking about this, right? This was what was in your agenda. It was content that did not serve the king. Again, it may have been really awesome content, but it wasn't what we're focusing in on. So keep that in mind. And now we're going to circle back to the whole idea of telling it like a story. I'm a big fan of structuring a presentation in such a way that, there are things that build upon each other, So again, we have chapters, we have books. I've been referring back to things I talked about in the prior segment, right? So I'm a big fan of trying to figure out how to build a progression with all the material and information that I'm talking about. One of the things I like to do in a lot of my demo sessions is that I'll introduce just a stored procedure SP help. And then later on in the presentation, I'll be like, hey, remember this shortcut I taught you earlier? Boom, here's me using it to illustrate something else, right? Simple things like that help your audience relate back to material that you talked about earlier and reminds them of that material. All right, so now that we got a whole bunch of ideas and we started cutting some of them away, we now have to start organizing it. And of course, the most common methodology for doing this is the outline. Some of us like outlining, some of us hate outlining, and frankly, it is kind of tedious. Now, if you're in the camp that hates outlining, or actually even if you do like outlining, I want to encourage you to try a second methodology, something called a storyboard. And if any of you, kind of study like film or anything like that, this idea will make a lot of sense to you. So what you're going to do with a storyboard is you're going to get a whole bunch of note cards or Post-it notes, and you're going to write down every single little snippet, every single little one-liner, every single little whatever, and throw them out onto your dining room table or wherever you want. Just throw them all out there. Again, it could be something small, it could be something larger. But then what you're going to do is you're going to start stacking and grouping the things that are related together. And then you're going to start reordering them in the way that makes sense to you to kind of help you visualize the flow of your talk track and the things that are related together. Here's a couple of demos that are related together. Here's a key fact, a simple story, an idea, or an overall category, something like that. And of course, you're going to go through multiple different iterations as you're doing this. And one thing I encourage you to do as you're shuffling these different cards around, take lots of photos as you keep going. Because the thing is, you might spend a half hour doing this, and you're 15 minutes in, well, I don't like this arrangement, but what did I have 10 minutes ago? I like that more. Well, I don't know what it was, but I took a photo of it, so I can easily jump back to it. And something that can help you develop the progression. And eventually, you're going to come up with, your final storyboard. Of course, take a photograph of that and save that out. But again, you see how I've stacked things together. I've grouped things together. And this is going to help you in the next chapter. All right, so let's just recap developing your subject matter a little bit. So I talked a bit about subtopics and focus, and that content must serve our focus statement, and that with the subtopics, don't bite off more than you can chew. And then forming a story. Figure out a way that works for you, but give your presentation such that it has some kind of progression. Those are the presentations that have the most engagement to them. Any questions about the develop chapter, by the way? No questions? All right, awesome. So let's move on to chapter 3, building your content. So now that you've done hopefully an outline and or a storyboard, that will almost directly translate one-to-one to your PowerPoint presentation. So when you're looking at those cards or you're looking at those outline elements, you're going to have certain things that will comprise an entire slide. You have certain things that will also comprise a bullet point on a given slide. But what's often neglected is the talking point. What do I mean? Oftentimes I will see presenters who have slides that are insanely busy, that there's tons and tons and tons of material on it. But the thing is, arguably, they're doing it wrong. Because an audience is not going to a presentation to read a slide deck. They're going to a presentation to listen to a presenter. The slides must support the speaker. It's not that the speaker supports the slides. So less is more. If you think you want to put it up on that slide, chances are you actually don't want to put it up on that slide. You just want to have a main point or something overview, and then you want to talk through it all. But Andy, I want to have a robust slide deck with all the information I'm talking about so that when my attendees go home, they'll have all this information to refer back to. I want my slides to be their notes. Well, did you know that in PowerPoint there's a notes segment? So what I strongly advocate for is not putting that content in the slide itself, but use the notes bits up here and then down here. And that's where you can add in all that extra supporting material. And also, as a first-time presenter, that's your cheat sheet as well, because in PowerPoint you can use presenter view and read off of the presentation notes there as well. So that's where you want to leave that extra note. So think of them as footnotes, those hidden notes, so that, again, when you release your PowerPoint presentation later on, all of your notes will be hidden in there. Okay? This is where I like to take a momentary break to illustrate a point. You've all read that slide in probably a fraction of a second, so you know exactly what it is that I'm going to be talking about next. That's what you don't want your audience to do, because this increases the risk that your audience will become disengaged with you, that they'll start looking on their phones, that they'll start yawning, that their mind will start wandering. You don't want your audience to ever get ahead of you, because oftentimes on a given slide, you're going to have maybe 3-4 talking points, right? But some of those talking points, each one of them could take upwards to a minute. If they've already read ahead, they're going to disengage. So therefore, the lesson for this is to learn how to use basic PowerPoint animations, to hide the content until you are ready to talk about each specific point. And in addition to that, invest in a presenter clicker. If you're still not sure about presenting, you just want to kind of dip your toe in the water and you don't want to invest in one, ask another speaker, hey, can I borrow your presentation clicker? But otherwise, you can get an Amazon Basics one for less than $20. These are super cheap these days. All right, so I'm going to teach you a key design technique when it comes to your PowerPoint presentations. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them. Tell them what you told them. Some of you are laughing here. Some of you may have even noticed that, now that I'm pointing this out, that I've been doing this in a very heavy-handed fashion in the course of this presentation, intentionally so. But this is actually based on education principles to really help you. You're setting up a topic. You're kind of, here's what I'm going to talk about. You then talk about it, and then you recap it to help reinforce it. So this is actually all a proven methodologies when it comes to teaching people about stuff. So tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. And this is how I'm going to encourage you to build out your slide deck, okay? Now with that, I'm going to reinforce that principle by talking about my PowerPoint pet peeves. My PowerPoint pet peeves happen to be two: font size and color choice. Let's talk a little bit about font size. Who can read that text? I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting older and I actually wear contact lenses. I'm pretty blind. So a lot of these fonts I can't read very well, especially if I'm in the back of a room. Now on the other hand, on the right side, you can definitely read those fonts for sure. That's just something that's very readable. I've actually been in presentation rooms that are very, very long and narrow, and I've had screens that are about half the size of this. So here's the thing. When we're developing a presentation, I'm doing it in front of my laptop. And on my laptop, when the screen is just a few feet from my face, 14-point font, 18-point font is totally readable to me. So here's a tip as you're developing this. Take some steps back from your computer screen. And now, can you read that, read that screen and read those fonts now? Maybe, maybe not. That's what you want to keep in mind for the sake of your audience, because not everyone's going to be sitting up front in the front row, right? There's plenty of people who like to sit in the middle or the back, right? So you want to make sure that you never say the following phrase. I'm sorry you can't read what's up on this slide deck, so here's what this says. If you ever have to say something like that, you failed in your PowerPoint design. And I've actually been in like company town hall meetings where a CEO has said that numerous times during a presentation. I'm like, you just failed. Like, no, that is the worst thing you can say because, again, your audience can't see what's going on and they're going to disengage. And that's the last thing you ever want. You don't want your audience to disengage. Oh yeah, so take several steps back. That was that tip. All right, colors also matter as well. There are not only are there folks who are color blind, so that becomes an issue. There are times when you're going to be in rooms with terrible lighting conditions. The screen may be washed out. You may have an older, terrible projector with a bulb that has seen better days, or whatever the case may be. So make sure that you choose a color scheme that has high contrast. Keep it simple. Now, sometimes people are stuck with a company PowerPoint template or something like that. You know what? Break the rules. If they have a couple of sets of colors for their fonts, darken them or lighten them just a little bit, just to increase that contrast. Because I can't tell you how many times I've seen company templates, put out by people in marketing who think they know what they're doing with PowerPoint, but it's obvious that when you look at them, they've never given a PowerPoint presentation in their life. Because again, the color contrast is completely horrible and the text is completely unreadable. You need to make sure that the text is readable. Otherwise, again, you risk an audience member disengaging, and that's the last thing you want. All right, so what are my PowerPoint pet peeves? We're going to quickly recap. Font size and color choice. All right, so this is me again telling you what I just told you. All right, so we're at a technical conference, of course, so oftentimes we're going to have demos. And it's, the thing about demos is that coming up with good demos takes a lot of time. Because especially for things like T-SQL demos, for me as a T-SQL developer, I have to come up with code that sucks just enough. Because it's very easy to come up with code that runs for hours and hours and hours to illustrate a particular point, but I don't have that kind of time. I need a demo that will just run for like 15, 20 seconds, but illustrate the exact same behavior that I want. So it has to suck just enough, and then I can show how to resolve it or whatnot in the course of a demo. You want your demos to be stable. You want your demos to be repeatable, right? How many times have we all gone to sessions where demos have kind of gone sideways? And you're always going to have issues with demos. It's always going to happen. It's always a variable. But you want to ensure as much stability as you possibly can. Comment your code heavily. So some people, some developer folks out there say, oh, we don't need comments. Code will document itself, right? I'm not of that mindset. And the thing is, when you're up on stage and you're freaking out and you're like, what am I supposed to be talking about here next? You can read your comments yourselves. It's your own cheat sheet. There's a guy named Bob Ward. Most of us know who Bob Ward is. He even on stage will pull up a text file that has notes about exactly what he is going to demo immediately thereafter. It's perfectly okay to have a little cheat sheet for yourself. Also, it's really, really good for your attendees later on if they're going to hopefully be running your demo a week or two later on to kind of recap on what was going on. They can read through your comments too. So it benefits everyone. And then I like to say create a reset mechanism. So if something goes sideways or whatnot, you know exactly that you can return to a specific state. And what I like to do, since I do a lot of T-SQL presentations, is I will use solutions, and then you see how I have a couple of different scripts here, and then you see the zero reset script. Some people say, well, you can do a backup and restore of a database, and yeah, sure, that's fine, but I like to use a script-based methodology such that I can always run this reset script. No matter where I am in any one of my demos, I know if I run that reset script, I will be back at a specific state. And that is my preferred methodology. But you obviously need to choose something that works for you. But regardless, figure something out so that you can always make sure that you can return to a specific state and continue on with your demo. All right. So a little bit of recap. We, of course, talked about that PowerPoint kind of technique of tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. What were my PowerPoint pet peeves, everyone? Thank you. And then, of course, we just spent a few moments or a few minutes talking a little bit about some other considerations when it comes to PowerPoint and or demos. Any questions about any of this material? Yes?
You mentioned to invest in a clicker. What about a microphone?
The question is, what is it? I said to invest in a clicker, but what about investing in a microphone? I've never bothered investing in a microphone before because the thing is you don't necessarily know what the AV setup is going to be at a given event. Oftentimes I'll give presentations at user groups or things like that. So usually it's a much smaller room. Now on the other hand, that may not be a bad idea if you know that you're more of a soft-spoken person. It's because you can actually get a portable microphone and a little speaker type thing for maybe $50 or so. It's actually not that bad of an investment. I would wait till you figure out that presenting is definitely for you as opposed to just your very first presentation. But again, if you find yourself like me and you're horribly addicted after your first, then yeah, that may actually be a very good investment to make. But you make that call yourself. But I'm one who's loud enough to project, but that's just me. So yeah, definitely not a bad idea though. But frankly, I don't know very many presenters who have actually bothered investing in their own microphones. So take it for what you will. All right? Great question. Any other questions? All right, let's move on. All right, final chapter, presenting your session. So practicing to present. What I'm going to encourage you to do is practice the hard way. What do I mean by this? A lot of people, when they practice a presentation, will sit in front of their laptop and just go like, click through, okay, then I'm thinking through this, click through, think. No. What you need to do is you need to stand up. You need to face some kind of pretend audience, whether it's a wall or your pets. My dogs hear my presentations all the time, right? You need to go through your presentation as if you are presenting it end to end. This is a huge time suck. I actually kind of hate it. But it's something that's extremely powerful. But the thing is, again, it's especially for a 60-minute presentation or 75-minute presentation, each dry run takes a full hour. That's a lot of time. So I will actually try and budget, or when I put my entire project plan together for putting a presentation together, I want to make sure that I am actually done 2 weeks ahead of time. Now, oftentimes that doesn't happen. It's usually more like a week, but I try and plan that way, right? And for what it's worth, I forgot to mention this earlier, putting a presentation together is a non-trivial effort. Typically speaking, because people ask me, how many hours do you invest in a typical presentation? I will say a minimum of 40, minimum. It all really depends on the type of content and how much demo I have to write. But at least 10 of them will be practicing it the hard way. The other interesting thing about practicing it the hard way is that the first time or two I give the presentation to my dog, I will never get all the way through. Because there's lots of ideas, there's lots of phrases or whatever that sound really good in your head, but when they come out of your mouth, it's like, oh, that didn't work so well, or that's like, or you wind up stumbling over it. So practice out loud, true practice will identify weaknesses that will help you out. So that way you can iron things out immediately. So like I said, the first couple of times I go through this exercise, I never finish because I keep making changes. But that's, again, what sounds good in your head doesn't necessarily sound good once it's coming out of your mouth. Or again, you decide to rearrange things or whatever the case may be. There's all sorts of edits that my presentations go through. But over time, practicing will build your confidence, because especially for that first-time presenter, you're going to be terrified, and it's perfectly okay. But building that confidence will help you, and being able to have things down, knowing that you've done these practice runs and these dry runs. Some people will, take the opportunity to give a practice run to their coworkers or something like that before a user group. So, do something like that. Do it to some family members who may be willing to listen. They may not understand the content if they're non-technical or work in a different field, but at least they're listening to you present and you're presenting in front of someone. But make sure that you're going through the physical motions of how you present. Like me, I'm a walker, so I'll walk around my dining room as I'm presenting. I'm not going to be sitting, in front of a desk. You got to get up. You got to physically go through everything that you're going to be doing to simulate you actually presenting. Here's a first-timer's tip. Memorize your first 5 minutes, because those first 5 minutes will oftentimes be your most difficult. That's when you're going to be freaking out the most. But if you have it down word for word for word, it'll be easier to slip into that zone, right? Because, we've all done activities where it's hard to get started, like exercising or sport, but once you're in that zone, you're good to go, right? So memorizing your first 5 minutes will help you slip into that zone that much easier. Learn Zoom It. So Zoom It is a free application out there that will allow you to zoom in on different elements, and not only zoom in, but also draw and highlight and things like that. So this is something that's completely free, but I've been in numerous presentations where people say, I wish they were using Zoom It or whatever the case may be, because I can't see what that graphic is. I can't see what this element is. Because you may increase your font size, but maybe you're showing a screenshot of something, right? So you want to be able to learn how to use Zoom It, become comfortable with this little application, which again is completely free. And this is me finally doing a demo in my presentation. All right. How are you feeling? You're going to be nervous. You're going to be terrified. This is your first time presenting. How do you think us seasoned veteran presenters feel? This is Jess Borland. She tweeted this out a couple of months ago. She's actually presenting here at PASS Summit right now, but she debuted this particular presentation that she's doing right now here at PASS at my user group back in August. And this is what she tweeted out a few hours prior. She has been presenting for well over 10 years. She is one of the people that I look up to as a presenter. She is one of the people that helped inspire me. And here's her admitting publicly that she is freaking the hell out. If she's freaking the hell out, it's perfectly okay for you all to be freaking the hell out too. I'll tell you flat out that, a couple hours before this, or, early this morning, I was getting the butterflies and things like that going. It never goes away. But you know what? It's perfectly okay. Accept that you're going to get nervous. But on the other hand, shift that nervousness into excitement energy, because this is something that should be fun, right? So what I like to do is that I actually have a particular playlist of songs that kind of get me energized, get me really jazzed up. So I will listen to some of those songs. If you actually look at Twitter later on or after this presentation, you'll see me, I actually tweeted that earlier today, that yeah, I'm actually jamming out to Nightwish and Hailstorm right now. So, but again, it's something to get me excited, get me into the mood, and to help shift that nervous energy into positive energy, right? Self-affirmation statements. We all make fun of the old SNL skit with Stuart Smalley, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. But you know what? I'm actually a strong believer in these silly little statements that help boost our confidence. Think to yourself, there are people here that are coming to see me present on this topic. They want to learn from me. The people who run this event chose me to give this. They have confidence in me that I'm going to pull this off. So you know what? I'm going to rock this. I can do this. So during your presentation, especially for first-time presenters, there is one thing that's very, very common that everyone fears the most, and that's the question. I may have my presentation down pat, but the thing is, someone could easily throw a curveball question at me. Or what if I also happen to get a heckler in my audience, right? So I'll say a couple of things about questions is, whose side is your audience on? What do I mean by that? This is particularly, what is it? There's the whole thing about, I've heard crazy stories about people getting heckled, people trying to, there's that one difficult audience member who tries to one-up everyone else or whatever the case may be. For a first-time presenter, if you have a heckler who's actually doing that to you, that person's a jerk, frankly. And also, in all the different presentations and sessions I've ever been in, the only time I've ever really seen someone who acts like that is that they want to try and one-up someone who's like a Brent Ozar or a Paul Randall, the top names in the industry. They don't do that to first-time presenters. And so, and the thing is, the big folks, the people who have been doing this for years, they can handle those hecklers just fine. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. How many times have you been in presentations where something like that has happened? It's actually quite rare. We come to fear those things that are very, very rare, but again, it's really rare. People in the audience come to your session because they want to learn. They are on your side. They want you to succeed so that they can go home with that takeaway promise of the new knowledge. So they are on your side. They are not against you. Own what you don't know. You know what? That's a great question. But you know what? Frankly, I've never run across that edge case. Or, wow, I'm sorry, I suddenly brain farted, right? It's okay. Own that. But then you know what? You might say, hey, that's a great edge case. I've never actually encountered that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do some homework on that. I'm going to write a blog post on that. Or, hey, let's talk after this presentation about that. I want to learn more about this use case, right? Ask for help. You know what? I'm a pretty smart person. But there are a whole bunch of other smart people sitting in this room. You know what? That's a great question. You know what? I'm not really sure. Does anyone else in the room happen to know? Throw it out back at them. I've actually done this in my own past presentations in years past. And I've had other people who are willing to help and will answer the question. And I'll say thank you. I just learned something new in my own presentation. Don't be afraid to learn something new in your own presentation. We're all here to learn. We all don't know everything about everything, right? So it's perfectly okay to say, you know what? I've never dealt with that. And you know what? I just learned something, and that's awesome. So great, I just got something out of this, right? Own it and run with it. All right, so after the session, you're going to be freaking out. You're going to be feeling nervous. You're going to be feeling all sorts of crazy emotions. You did fine. We are our own worst critics. So oftentimes we'll find ourselves freaking out thinking, oh, I screwed this little bit up, I screwed that up, I stumbled over a few words here or there. Frankly, your audience probably didn't notice most of those little stumbles or things of that nature. That or they've long forgotten, because again, those little things like that don't really matter. You did just fine, especially as a first-time presenter. Athletes don't expect Olympic-level performances when you first start competing in a sport, right? It takes many years to get up to that level. So you know what? As a first-time presenter, you got through it. You did just fine. Remember Jess and those tweets from earlier? Well, this is what she tweeted out after the presentation, that she found it went a heck of a lot better than she expected. Despite the fact that she was nervous and freaking out, it went all right. Sure, there are things to be improved upon. We gave her a lot of solid, constructive feedback, but it went great. She did just fine, and that's how it's going to be for you too, guaranteed. So, at the end of your presentation, you want to start thinking about the next time you do this. Write down any questions that you receive, or have a friend in the audience write down those questions that your audience members throw out at you. because those questions will often identify gaps in your story, in your presentation, and those are things that you may want to add on again later on as talking tracks or talking bits or whatever. Listen objectively to your feedback. So hopefully you all will take some time to fill out the session evaluations, and then when you read them later, you might say, get 29, phenomenal, this was a great presentation. And you get one bit of feedback that said, yeah, this sucked. Here's the thing. We as humans will mentally focus on that one, this sucked. It's human nature, and then we'll be really, really upset about it, and we'll completely forget the fact that 29 people thought this thing was awesome. Well, again, remember what I said earlier about the whole, the ideas that it's all been done before? That one person, it was, your presentation, it was just one that it just didn't click with that person, and that's okay. But again, it made sense to 29 other people, right? So focus on the fact that you just made sense. You clicked for those 29 other people. Don't focus on that one negative. Also, one other thing I strongly emphasize in session evaluations is that if you think a session sucked, that's fine. Tell me why and tell me how I can improve. If I do not get constructive feedback out of that particular session evaluation, it goes in the garbage. Because if you're not going to give me just a comment or two about identifying, yeah, I didn't like the way you explained this, it just didn't make sense to me, or whatever the case is, but you know what, if you tried this would really work. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I can now make that improvement and try it in this fashion rather than that fashion. But if you're not going to be willing to do that, or and I see that bit of feedback, it's gone. So again, be objective about the feedback that you receive. And always keep in mind that every single presentation has room for improvement. That very first presentation from years ago, that data types one that I talked about, it went through something like 11 different iterations over the 2 years that I actively presented that session. So it was just something that constantly evolved. And that's okay. Because here's the thing. We as humans are constantly learning new stuff, right? At this point in my life, I don't know everything that I'm always ever going to know, right? We're constantly learning. And in the same way, a presentation will always be evolving, and that's perfectly okay. And finally, the most important thing, celebrate the fact that you just did something. You accomplished something that most never will. How many thousands of people are here at this conference right now? How many people are actually speakers and presenters? Only a fraction. So you've just joined an elite group of people who have actually gotten up on stage, gotten up in front of people, and given a presentation. And that's awesome. And you need to celebrate that. Even if you thought it went terribly, you still did it. You still executed. And the only way from here is up to improve. All right. So let's recap a little bit about presenting your session. Practice and practice this again. Again, this will be a huge time suck, but it will pay off in the end. You will be nervous. It's absolutely okay to be nervous. And don't fear the questions. Own things that you don't know. It's all right. So I'm just going to quickly recap the entire presentation. We talked about creating your idea. We have things like the focus statement and the rules of engagement. And then developing your subject matter, making sure that your content serves the focus statement and the rules of engagement. Talked a little bit about building your content. What were my PowerPoint pet peeves, everyone? Font size and color choice, thank you very much. And then presenting your session, we just recapped that a moment ago. Now, I want to leave you with a parting thought. Don't do this alone. Find a mentor. This website up here called speakingmentors.com was started about 2 years ago by a couple of us, and it's basically a kind of a classified section, if you will. Basically, a whole bunch of us in the community basically just post up our information and say, yes, we're all open to being mentors for speakers. If you don't want to bother going with this site, I am willing to mentor each and every one of you. This is an open standing offer right now. So if you want a mentor to help you get into speaking, help you build your presentation, contact me. My contact information will be on the last slide. And for all of you who are watching this session on a recording, whether it be 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, 3 years from now, this offer stands for all of you as well. I want to mentor you. I've mentored a number of people over the years, and it's been a great success. Have had a lot of fun with it, and I love giving back because there are people that gave back to me and helped me out. So that being said, there's a resources PDF file also up on my GitHub. So if nothing else, again, just remember my GitHub. That PDF has probably 2 or 3 pages worth of URLs, additional readings, some additional videos, and things of that nature. It's a phenomenal set of resources. Again, just remember my GitHub. In addition to that, please, please, please take 30, 60 seconds to fill out your session evals. This is very important to me. And as I stressed earlier, if there are things that worked for you, great. If there are things that didn't work for you, please tell me how I can improve, how I can continue evolving. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it. I will be around for a while if anyone wants to ask specific questions or things like that. And of course, I'll also be at the Century One booth. Yes?
Do you have any specific ideas for plan Bs, like if your computer craps out on you?
Sure. So the question is, do you have any specific suggestions for plan Bs? Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things that can go sideways. For example, a projector could die. Your computer could completely crap out on you and whatnot. So, I mean, like, for example, I have a copy of all of my presentations on a USB drive in here. So I know I have a disaster recovery plan of, okay, if I have to start this from a fresh computer that someone hands me, obviously I need a few minutes, but I have my checklist of this is exactly what I need to do in order to get online and operational again. Now, there have been some other people that have, had issues during the middle of a presentation. Like, for example, their demo's not working correctly. So some people actually do a recording of their demos. So that way they can just play a video if, for example, like this is particular if, like, for example, you're doing something with Azure, but the internet service is terrible in your particular location. Okay, sorry, I can't do a live version of this, but here's a recorded version of it, and we can at least talk through that. My good friend Catherine actually had a presentation where the projector completely died, and there's just a fantastic photo of her in social media where everyone is gathered around her laptop, and she is, basically still jamming through it. I mean, it's one of those things where you just work through it as best as you possibly can. And Catherine actually talks about this. You will fail. Everyone will have a fail situation at some point in their speaking career. It's okay. Expect it and just do your best to work through it. But of course, try and come up with as many possible contingencies as you can. But as a first-time presenter, focus on your presentation first. That's my best advice. I hope that helps. Thanks. You're welcome. Any other questions before we break for lunch? All right, well, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it.